Okay, today we're going to look at the second part of sensation and perception. One thing that I really want y'all to understand is that you will not remember anything unless you have attached that with an emotion. So this quote by Arnold Bennett is very important. There can be no knowledge without emotion. We may be aware of a truth, yet until we have felt its force, it is not ours. To the cognition of the brain must be added the experience of the soul. We left off last time looking at two different streets and the differences between those streets and how we perceive the safety of those streets because of the way they looked. We're going to start this part with our attitude. Our attitude has a major impact on the way we view the world and how we handle crisis, like the one we're in right now, this coronavirus pandemic. Some of us are freaking out. Some of us are fine. Some of us are taking it one day at a time, which is really what we need to be doing and not buying into the fear that is out there. So let's look at attitude. Attitude is made up of a mental and neural state of readiness to respond. So it's not only our mind, but it's also the way we think about things, the way that we perceive things. Or attitude is organized perspectives that have been established through experience. You guys remember, I've told you before that once you have responded to something in a certain way, you more than likely will continue to do that. It's something that's been hardwired into your emotion, into your total being. So your brain has been involved, your memory is involved, your emotions are involved. So therefore you will continue to do that, respond in the same way from that time forward. Attitude is a feeling that exerts a directive or a dynamic influence on behavior. Our attitude really is everything. If we have a good attitude about something, we will do better. If we have a sour attitude about something, we will not do well. That is one reason I feel like if I encourage you, then you are going to do better in what you're doing. If I keep beating you down with my words, you are not going to do well. But if I encourage you and tell you how good you're doing, even though maybe you're not an A student, you're just trucking along, you're going to start doing better because you'll start thinking, oh, I'm good. I need to work harder. And we do. All of us do. Let's look at the chart that says chance of success. It says, I can't. I wish I could. I think I might. I think I can. I will. I did. If we believe in ourselves a little bit, we can go a lot farther. Our attitude really tells us how high we're going to go. It establishes or it will set our altitude. Stimulus response. This is what this whole last part of this chapter is really about. Associations have no meaning in biology. However, because of social learning, an association can evoke both a cognitive and biological response. Remember, cognitive is what we've learned. And then biological is our body, how our body is going to respond to this. Our human associations to experience are in three different parts. A response is dictated by prior knowledge. A response to a stimulus is based on one's memory pertaining to a significant time or place. The stimulus causes a physiological reaction. Whatever that stimulus is, then we're going to respond to it in the same way. Like I've told y'all before, my roommate one time scared me really bad. Because of that, I scream at simple things anymore. I wish I didn't, but it's just my response. If something catches me off guard or scares me, I'm going to scream because that is just a stimulus response. It will be that way until I really try to change it. And thus far, it hadn't happened because you don't know when things are going to scare you. This is a little cartoon, but it's very good about explaining this sensory response. So the little guy says, there's a phone on the desk and it's ringing. And he thinks, I heard the phone is ringing. And then he turns around, looks at the phone, and thinks, I should pick it up. And then he does pick it up and he says, hello. And in the little box, it says nerve sent impulse to organ to response. Response is he picked up the phone. The stimulus is the phone ringing. The sensory organ is the ear, because there's always a sensory organ. We've got 5 of them. And the brain received the impulse from the nerves. The nerve sent the impulse to the organ. The response is he picked up the phone. This is a really good picture of what the stimulus response is all about. Okay, in this image, what does this look like? A wall, just a plain old wall. But we can see this is really not. And guys, this is a really good way to camouflage walls that need to be camouflaged. Like for elderly people want to go home and they want to get out the door and they cannot lock the doors from the inside in one of these homes. It's against the code. Those doors have to stay open at all times. But you also don't want them to get out and to harm themselves or get lost. So to camouflage a door would be a very good thing. Now, the people there know that, but they don't necessarily know that. Also, it's another way to camouflage a door, like going down a hallway to an executive office. Maybe they want a way to get out without having to go back through the lobby or the reception. This would be a good way to camouflage that door so that only he knows it or a few of the people in the company know it, but not everybody would know because it's a good way to camouflage the door. Okay, now we're going to look at classical and operant conditioning, and I want to play this little video for you so that you will understand it a little bit better. So listen carefully.
When we think about learning, we often picture students in a classroom or lecture hall, books open on their desk, listening intently to a teacher or professor in the front of the room. But in psychology, learning means something else. To psychologists, learning is a long-term change in behavior that's based on experience. 2 of the main types of learning are called classical conditioning and operant or instrumental conditioning. Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dog salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of a bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation an unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some steak. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works with animals, but how does it work with humans? In exactly the same way. Let's say that one day you go to the doctor to get a shot. She says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit," and then gives you the most painful shot you've ever had. A few weeks later, you go to the dentist for a checkup. He starts to put a mirror in your mouth to examine your teeth, and he says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit." Even though you know the mirror won't hurt, you jump out of the chair and run screaming from the room. When you went to get a shot, the words, "this won't hurt a bit," became a conditioned stimulus when they were paired with the pain of the shot, the unconditioned stimulus, which was followed by your conditioned response of getting the heck out of there. Classical conditioning in action. Operant conditioning explains how consequences lead to changes in voluntary behavior. So how does operant conditioning work? There are 2 main components in operant conditioning, reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcers make it more likely that you'll do something again, while punishers make it less likely. Reinforcement and punishment can be positive or negative, but this doesn't mean good and bad. Positive means the addition of a stimulus, like getting dessert after you finish your veggies, and negative means the removal of a stimulus, like getting a night of no homework because you did well on an exam. Let's look at an example of operant conditioning. After eating dinner with your family, you clear the table and wash the dishes. When you're done, your mom gives you a big hug and says, "Thank you for helping me." In this situation, your mom's response is positive reinforcement if it makes you more likely to repeat the operant response, which is to clear the table and wash the dishes. Operant conditioning is everywhere in our daily lives. There aren't many things we do that haven't been influenced at some point by operant conditioning. We even see operant conditioning in some extraordinary...
I'm sorry, this messed up. I'll put the link below so that you can watch it there. The classical and operant conditioning is something that we need to understand, not only as individuals, but as parents in the future, because we can get things done in people by being kind, or as they said, rewarding things or taking things away, which is not necessarily negative. Now let's move on to subliminal perception. Subliminal perception is sensory information that can be received and processed in the brain without conscious thought. And I want you to watch this little video.
You sure? It's $1. It won't get me anything these days.
You could turn that dollar into a KFC snacker.
What?
The snacker's only 99 cents.
Then come to Buffalo.
Honey barbecue? Ultimate cheese.
Today, I am a wealthy man. Actually, I'm eating.
Big taste, big variety, small coin. The 99-cent snacker is...
Do you see the dollar sign there? That is subliminal perception. Our mind perceives it, but we don't necessarily see it, but our mind does. And it's reinforcing that this little snack meal is less than $1. Subliminal perception.
KFC, grab one and go for just 99 cents.
Subliminal perception. It's there. Your mind picks up on it, but you do not necessarily. I wouldn't have said, "Oh, I see the dollar sitting there." It's reinforced with the life tastes better with KFC. Illusions. This is perceptual conflict. This forces a person to focus on a specific set of standards while ignoring others. What do you see when you look at this? Personally, I saw a rabbit laying in some grass, right? I bet others of you saw a duck that is laying on its back with its beak sticking up. This is perceptual conflict. And there's other ones. This is what we call perceptual illusions. And we have a lot of these that flood the internet, especially Facebook. Let's look at another one. This one is another type of physical illusion. You look at that and you think that those red lines are moving. Part of it is because the colors are fighting each other, which causes this movement. If you look at it long enough, and let's look at another one. This is called the obliviate. This one of all of them is the one that frustrates me the most. If you look at the top right end of it, there's 2 prongs, but you look at the bottom and there's 3. As you move up, it disappears somewhere. And this one, for me, is the worst one. Another type of perceptual illusion. The human element can affect the perception of illusions due to these 5 different things. 1, motivation. 2, expectations. Our cognitive style, our experience and culture, and our personality. So let's go back and look at these. Motivation. We will more than likely perceive what we want to perceive. What motivates us? If a doctor and a designer are observed a wreck, the doctor is going to be more concerned about if the people are hurt or not. The designer may look at how the car crashed. What was affected? Which car was damaged more than the other one? We're more concerned about the design. So we would have 2 different perceptions of the same wreck. And that's a pretty simple explanation, but it's the truth. So our motivation The things that we're interested in are the things that would cause us to look at certain things different ways. Our expectations. We will often perceive what we believe we ought to perceive. If I think that I'm supposed to understand a design pattern more than the theory behind it, then I'm going to tear into that design pattern and try to understand, because I am more of a visual learner. The words on the page is not as impactful to me as the visual, maybe the images, okay? Our cognitive style will also play a lot into how we perceive things. What we've learned in the past will affect what we perceive in the future. Go back to my story about when Amy and I first came to Saudi. And I got to the Frankfurt airport and I saw the henna on the fingertips. My understanding was when you have paint on you like that, it's because you're sick. I had no idea that that was for a celebration or a wedding or something. They had been to a wedding. And we all laugh about it now, but then I had no reference at all for explanation to Amy. All right, our experience and our culture. We often misperceive what we have not perceived before. Exactly what I just got through saying. If we have not experienced before, there's no way we can understand it. We can put the clues together, but we may not get to a proper perception of it because we don't know what it is. If you've never experienced it, you're not going to understand it. And then our personality. We have different personalities. God has given us all different personalities. Our personalities are affected by our culture, by the way we were raised in our home life, the mentoring we've received, the education that we've received, the travel that we have done. All of these things are going to aid in how we perceive things. When I first got here, I went on a field trip with some younger students and we went to an office, and I was shocked at how many of the students had never been in an office building. They had been to the mall, they'd been to the grocery store, but not to an office building. In America, it's commonplace for us to go to an office building, but here, not so much. It was like, whoa, this is way different, but this is part of the culture. Instead of going to the doctor's office like we do in America, which is usually in an office building, you go to the hospital to see the doctor. So there's a difference in culture, a difference in tradition. The way you do things is different. So all of that plays into your personality. And because of that, we filter things differently. Anthropomorphizing. This is when we attribute human qualities to non-human items. There's a lady by the name of Beatrix Potter. There's a movie that was made about her several years ago. It's called Miss Potter. Potter. You guys need to watch that movie. It's very good. And she would draw. She found herself alone. She was a daughter of a banker. She could never be quite good enough for anybody. Even though her dad loved her and her mother loved her, she just couldn't do things quite enough. And it was in that age and time when boys were more important than the girls, because the boys are the ones that are going to, bring money back, and you guys understand. She developed a love of drawing, and she started drawing little animals. And while she would draw, they would come to life off of that page. She had Peter Rabbit, she had different, and you can buy little sets, dinnerware sets and stuff for children with her animals on there. This is one image that she drew. She even went on to make books. She met a young man and he helped her make books, and one day she wanted to buy a place to live. She went to the bank. She said, I want to get a loan. And the banker said, you don't need a loan. You've got so much money, you can buy 3 of these. She didn't even know she had the money in the bank. And her parents did not either. Anthropomorphizing is when we attribute human qualities to non-human items. What is another company that makes a lot of money off of attributing human qualities to non-human items. There's several. Walt Disney's one. Advertisers do this a lot. When a duck will talk, or a pen will talk, or a car will talk, that is putting human qualities to non-human items, anthropomorphizing. Now, the Gestalt psychology is the study of the ways in which people organize and select from the vast array of stimuli that is presented to them. And it focuses on visual stimuli. Our perception is heavily influenced by what a person sees, as well as by other cues originating from sound, smell, and touch. Perception as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which is the premise behind the Gestalt psychology. If we look at the image on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see all of the parts that are in the image on the right-hand side of the screen. However, if I gave you just the image on the left-hand side of the screen, would you ever be able to put it together so it looked like the image on the left-hand side of the screen? No. That is why the Lego Corporation has really used this for their benefit. They will give you the images and they will give you the step-by-step process, but yet they give you all the pieces in a bag. We could not put them together the way they were supposed to look if we did not have a picture of what it's supposed to look like. And for theirs, a lot of their packaged items, like the Guggenheim Museum, they will give you the pieces step by step. And then you can do it. If not, there's no way that you could put it together. Our perception as a whole is greater than the sum of its parts, meaning we can understand it when it's all together. But if we just had all the parts together and not the image of the whole piece, we would not understand it. Gestalt psychology contends that we are innately driven to experience the world around us in a regular, orderly, simplified, and symmetrical manner. We will look at something and we will simplify it. If I told you to think about the way your room looked in your head, you would just see a picture of it. But if I said, do you have a brush in your room? You would immediately go to where that brush is located and be able to pull it out. You know where it is. That is basically what this is saying. We see it in a whole. It's what we regularly think about. It's maybe orderly, it's very simplified, and it can be very symmetrical. Gestalt psychologists reject a reductionist approach to perception. This analyzes a person's perception part by part and aggregates that information to draw a conclusion. We don't do that. We put it all together. This is because they assert that it is the interplay between the parts that creates the perception. We have to have all of those pieces. When we think about our room, we don't think about the bed first, and then the dresser, and then the closet, and then we think about the whole image. It's not piecemealed together. Gestalt has several laws that explain how we perceive and remember the world around us. The first one we're going to look at is the law of closure. In any of these images, we can look at it and our mind will fill in the missing pieces. So when we look at the first image on the left, it is not a broken circle. It is, but we would just say circle. Same thing with the triangle. And you can see even in the other images, you can call out the image and you're not going to necessarily tell us what the positive images are, which are the dark shapes. You're going to call out what the white shape is, which is the negative image. So all of this is part of the law of closure. Law of similarity. This means that we will group similar items together within a larger form to create some form of continuity. If you look at the image on the left, the top one works together. The bottom image fights each other because they're not similar. They don't work together. So in the image on the right, why does it work? If you look in there, the 4 paintings that are on the wall, the images of the botanicals, you will see that they're all framed alike, but the images are not alike. Also, Look at the chairs. The chairs look alike because they're all painted black, but they're not alike. They're different. This is a good way to take things that are similar but not alike and make them work together in an orderly manner. And that goes back. We want that order. We like order. We don't like it messy and mixed up. We want it working together. And you also see that in this image, you've got that red chandelier and the red vase at the back. And that's the only real pop of color besides the earthen colored vase that's on the table. Other than that, it's all black and white, basically. These things just help us organize. As designers, it's a good trick to know. Okay, the law of proximity. This is when items are close together. They are seen as belonging together regardless of the actual connection. So in the Unilever logo, we see a lot of different shapes in there, but because they're organized in the shape of a U, we see the U. We will then go in and see the different shapes that are making up that U, but we see the U because it is close together. Same thing with the series of circles. We don't necessarily see the series of circles. We see flowers, stylized flowers. And in the lower right-hand corner, we see a box and a series of stripes, but they're made out of individual circles. Law of proximity. Things that are close together, we read them together. Here's the law of symmetry. When we look at these, we are compelled to group dissimilar items together so as to create symmetry. So on the one on the left, we see a cross or a plus sign, and the four squares in that plus sign on the different quadrants of that plus sign. And then on the image on the right, the thing that sticks out is the one guy that in gold. But I will tell you, if that person had a skirt on and was black, you would still pick it out because it's different. We group the ones together that are alike, and the one that doesn't, it will stick out like a sore thumb every time. The law of continuity. This is when we see things as a continuation or a connection rather than as separate entities. Fortunately, we will see something going up rather than going down. And we see it the way we know it. So let's look at this. In the law of continuity, the lines are seen as following the smoothest path. And in this situation, we're not going to look at the blue dots. We'll see the line go up, not go down. In the image with the red and the gray, it doesn't matter that the top part of those dots are red and the lower part are gray. We still will see that line curve and go across the page, a horizontal curved line. We don't see it go up. That's the law of continuity. When we see an X, we don't see the different lines. We don't see them as the angled lines at the bottom. We see it like we do the top, because that is the way we write an X. That's the way we know it. We don't write our X's in two parts like at the bottom. So we know it that way. That's the way we're going to see it. The law of figure ground. This is when we typically perceive only one aspect of an image, when the image can be viewed in both positive, negative, and foreground, background perspectives. So in the one on the left, what I see is two people looking at each other, because you look at the positive space, which is the black area, where the one on the right, if you look at the black area, which is the positive space, you see, and in this one it's the foreground, you see a vase, not the two people looking at each other. But it's the same thing. It's just the background on one is black and the foreground on another one is black. It's opposites. So the law of figure ground, what it can help, it changes what we see and how we see it. That is the end of chapter 4, and we will move on to chapter 5 in the next few days. Thank you.